Northern Ireland's women's football manager, Kenny Shiels, was forced to apologise yesterday after he offered this analysis of his side's 5-0 loss to England.
Right through the whole lot, the whole spectrum of the women's game, because girls and women are more emotional than men. So they take a goal going in, they don't take that very well. So if you go through the stats, which journalists love to do, going through stats, and you'll see teams conceding goals in 18 and 21 minutes, and then in 64 and 68 minutes. They group them because that's an emotional goal.
Seemed like a coach scrutinising his team's performance to me, but his comments drew fierce criticism from ex-players. Former England goalkeeper Siobhan Chamberlain branded his interview bizarre, while ex-Arsenal striker Ian Wright took to Twitter to furiously blast the comments, writing, "Kenny Shiels talking foolishness, talking about emotional women. Didn't that man see how many times I was crying on the pitch?" But the 65-year-old has retained the support of his dressing room, as Northern Ireland captain Marissa Callaghan said in a statement today that the team all stood by their manager, and she actually explained his comments by saying, "We feel his interview was in relation to a meeting we had as a team where we analysed that we concede goals in quick succession, and emotions was one of the many things we discussed. He is a man of integrity who cares for us like we are family." So what do you think? Should Kenny Shiels have really had to apologise for his comments? Down at GBNews.uk, at GBNews on Twitter, we've got a poll running there. I'm going to be very interested in those results. But first, let me get the view of legendary England goalkeeper Peter Shilton, legendary comedian Jim Davidson, and the author and journalist Ella Whelan. Great to have the three of you with us. Peter Shilton, was this sexist, or did he just make a mistake?
I think he sounded like a manager who was trying to make an excuse for a 5-0 loss. And I mean, we've seen all that before in men's football as well. But you know, I certainly think he was right to withdraw that, because, you know, women's football has progressed a lot over the last few years. You know, it's getting better and better all the time. I mean, in any sport, if you look at any sport, whether it's tennis, golf, you know, we see so many times when women overcome, you know, they lose a bad set and they come fighting back, or golf, they play a bad hole and they come back. They're no different to men, but obviously they've not quite got that experience to handle the pressure and the passion sometimes. But, you know, it's not unnatural.
So you think men can be just as emotional, Peter? Male footballers?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you look at men, like Wright, you said there he was crying. You look, Ronaldo's been crying on the pitch, Messi, Stuart Pearce in the 1990 shootout crying, Chrissy Waddle was crying, Gaz was crying. And, you know, it's just an emotional thing, as I say. Sport is very emotional, and you know, things happen, and some people want to let it out by crying, and you know, that's perfectly natural.
Jim Davidson, you don't think Peter Shiels should have had to, Kenny Shiels, should have had to apologise?
Well, I think it's all part of this cancel culture as well, isn't it? He said what he thought, his opinion. Peter's right. He'd just been beaten 5-0. The girls, it turned out, have sat there and talked about emotional problems and mental problems on the pitch. So he said something. It's upset someone who's a bit woke, and they said, you better go on and apologise. I think it's a little bit sad.
Because he was trying to give some genuine analysis, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think he was. And I think someone's just stirring it up. Of course, women are no more emotional than men. And I've seen Ian Wright cry on the pitch when he's played at Charlton. No, but, you know, it is really... And, you know, women's football, Peter's right, it is great. But, you know, it's very difficult to compare women's football to men's football. I mean, it's very difficult for me to talk about women's football, because really, you know, what do I know? I mean, even the leader of the opposition can't define what a woman is. So what's all that about?
Indeed, exactly. But Jim, I mean, what's weird to me is that it's even taken as a put down to say that a woman is more emotional than a man. How is it even a negative thing?
Well, I don't think it's a negative thing, but people set out to be offended, don't they?
Yeah.
They do. I think it's ridiculous. This is woke creeping in everywhere, and we don't need it. Let those girls get on. They've just been hammered 5-0. They've got to get back, whatever. And I love women's football. I sit there. Do you know what? You're talking of emotion. When someone scores a goal, it doesn't happen much down the valley, but when they score a goal, these guys run around like headless chickens, and they whip that shirt off. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing that in women's football, to tell you the truth. I'm not holding me. I know, I had to stoop that low, sorry.
Ella
But
Whelan,
you know what I mean?
you are our legendary girl here on The Clash tonight. Were you offended by this? Did you think that Kenny should have had to offer this grovelling apology?
No, I think most of the time these kind of apologies that are forced aren't worth very much at all. And we've got a kind of obsession with trying to squeeze apologies out of people. It doesn't really move me. I mean, it was unfortunate that he made these comments, perhaps for him, in the same week that we saw Ronaldo slapping phones out of the hands of teenagers. I mean, talk about emotion.
That was bad.
Run wild,
That was bad.
And we saw in in some of the penalty finals in the World Cup how, in relation to the England team, emotion and nerves and all the natural stuff that would happen to you in a game might get on top of you. So, I'm perhaps he said that he knows the stats on this. I bow to his expertise. I'm nothing of a football expert. But I think it's important to state that there is a bit of a problem with suggesting that women are more emotional than men. On an individual case by case basis, it might be true. But the reason why there is this stereotype that women are more emotional than men, and by the way, it's not just Kenny Shields, it's also lots of feminists buy into this narrative by suggesting that women leaders are better naturally than men because they're women, because we're more caring, because we're nicer, blah, blah, blah. And the reason why that stereotype exists is because women are expected to do the kind of emotional caring roles in society. We still do have a problem with men not sharing equal amounts of things like child work or housework or things like that. There's not to sound cliche, but it's not a coincidence that it's usually the woman in the house that remembers your mother's birthday and has to tell your husband to send a card and things like that. From the trivial to the important stuff, there is a differentiation between men and women's role in society that quite often plays off badly for women, and I think that needs to change. I take the point about, there is an element of cancel culture here where I think people are extremely willing to be offended at the very slightest thing, and that's really not helpful for either the women on that team or.
Indeed, because Peter Shilton.
Dan, I think as a manager, it's criticising your players in public. I mean, they obviously spoke about this before the game.
Yeah.
And then obviously after the match, he's come out and used statistics, which, to be fair, that should be left in the dressing room, So I think he realised that. The players will probably learn by him in the dressing room saying, look, we can't let this happen again, really switch on when you let a goal in, etc. But the fact is that he tried to make out that women were inferior to men in terms of emotionally. And, that's where it's all gone wrong.
Well, I think that if you assume that it's a negative thing to be more emotional, and I guess what I have struggled with, Jim Davidson, is that this bloke, Kenny Shields, clearly isn't a sexist, because if he was a sexist, he would not have chosen as his career path currently to coach a women's team. He would want to coach a men's team. So I worry now that any time a football manager is up at one of these press conferences, they're going to be so scared to give any real analysis because they're worried that they might end up being cancelled by the Twitter mob.
You've got it right there. Everyone's worried to say what they're thinking because if someone else disagrees with you, you're going to end up being cancelled. I mean, the only people that can speak their mind now, Dan, is you.
And you're very naughty still, Jim.
I have a go, but I'm cancelled all over the place. It'll probably black me out now.
He's gone.
If I can just
Carmenella.
make one thing clear. The reason why people were a bit pissed off about what he said was not because he said that women are emotional, but because he said that women are weren't able to control their emotions in the game. And that is a problem. You know, the suggestion that women are not able to control their emotions. And you can see why women might get a bit ticked off. But, you know, my fellow panelists have joked about women lifting their tops off on the game, which isn't very funny. And I've been introduced as a girl, not a woman. So, you know, there is existing in society, which I think we should take seriously. But forcing, you know, a Northern Irish Women's League manager to apologise for a silly comment is ridiculous. What I want to talk about is the real ways in which women's freedom is hampered in society. And I might take the jokes from my fellow panellists, but I think it's a very serious issue that shouldn't be taken lightly.
Jim?
Well, fine, it's okay. Some fall on stony ground, don't they? As I say, that was a funny joke, but some people set out not to like it. Even if they're being tickled, they wouldn't smile. I'm afraid that's what it is. There's no other way to look at it. It's ridiculous. Crazy. I'm a bad guy. I'll cancel myself, okay, Ella?
I think sometimes there's things said that should be just taken with a pinch of salt, you know, but these days everything is either racist or gender orientated
or sexist.
You know, come on, let's grow up a little bit and just you know, let's just let some things go. And he made a mistake and he apologized, you know, but you can't go comparing women against men in sport. I mean, you know, if the England men's team played the men's football team, we know who would win. But, you know, that's a give me. But we don't expect the women to be as good as the men, certainly not at the moment, because they've not been playing for enough years, really. I mean, I don't think physically they would be anyway.
No.
I think someone's got it in for this guy, for Kenny. Exactly the same with all the problems in the world are going on, but they're still going on about cake. His team's just been beaten 5-0, and he's the bad guy for trying to sort that out. Crazy.
Ella Whelan, final word to you. And I'm hugely sorry that I called you a legendary girl. I was just making light because obviously I think you're an incredible human being.
I was partly making light myself, but I couldn't miss the opportunity. I think that part of the problem with so much of this is when it comes out of the mouth of a man, it sounds really bad. But in actual fact, and people get their knickers in a twist. But in actual fact, this narrative of women being emotional, most often, this is the point I really wanted to make, most often comes from my fellow sisters in contemporary feminism, who, for example, suggest that, Angela Merkel and female leaders throughout the pandemic were better at handling things because they're nicer,
they are more emotional. I think you've made a great point there because you did see it all the time. Everyone was saying, weren't they, Jacinda Ardern, isn't she amazing? She's hugging people. She's tapping into people's emotions. So I do think you make a good point there, Alan, because these people want to have it both ways. Either we treat everyone the same and it doesn't make a difference what your sex is, or we can acknowledge that there are differences between women and men. Although I will say, I think I'm more emotional than any woman I've ever met. And I'm ashamed about it, but sometimes I just can't control myself. Thank you so much to all three of you. That was legendary England footballer Peter Shilton, legendary author and journalist Ella Whelan, and the legendary, very naughty comedian Jim Davidson. Thank you all.